Hey everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Shannon Watts. I'm the founder of Moms Demand Action. I am also a speaker and an author and an organizer, and I am so excited to be your MC this evening. And before we start to talk about our subject, which I think is a really special and important one, if you are new here, first of all, welcome. Women Wednesdays for Harris is a weekly organizing call where we train messengers and volunteers on the most effective ways to take action to ultimately help Kamala Harris and Tim Walz win big in November. And just a quick reminder to hit the closed caption button. If you don't see closed captions, it's the CC button. And along the way tonight, we're going to drop links in the chat. Tomorrow, you'll get an email with all of the follow-up information from tonight's session. Love to see your energy and your emojis in the chat. We are going to turn it off for just a little bit so you can focus on the content, but it will pop back up at the end so you can say goodbye. So each week, these conversations, we focus on a very specific organizing theme. And we really try to give you a clear call to action and very tangible steps that you can take that will help you build momentum and persuade voters. And yes, this is a space for women, but we also often welcome male speakers because they are our allies in this crucial work. Tonight's theme is all about prioritizing your mental health and your well-being while doing election work and activism in general. And I was really eager to host this topic because I myself have felt burnt out over the last 12 years or so that I've done activism. And in fact, I will tell you last night, my husband dropped a fork on the floor and it made a very loud noise, and it just evoked this emotion in me that felt a little bit like rage. It was absolutely an overreaction. And it made me realize that maybe I needed to get into my calendar and cull it a bit. So look, there are times when you're an activist that you have to step back, that you have to take care of yourself, that you have to take care of your family. And I have learned along the way that the work to repair the world never ends, and you are not helping yourself or the world if you end up burning out. You have to rest. You have to recuperate, you have to take breaks if you want to stay in activism long term. And that is just something that we have to do when we live in a democracy. It's really important to remember that activism isn't a marathon. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And it's also a relay race. Look at it that way, right? You pass the baton to other people when you need to. I am a practicing Buddhist. I am a meditator. I am incredibly excited to have guests on tonight who are experts in self-care and also mindfulness, loving kindness, self-compassion. And there's someone that I admire who exemplifies all of these qualities in real life, and he is our first guest tonight, U.S. Senator Cory Booker. Senator Booker served as Newark's mayor for more than 7 years. He has represented New Jersey in the U.S. Senate since 2013, and he has emerged as a national leader in the effort to fix a broken criminal justice system to end mass incarceration. He helped craft the most sweeping set of criminal justice reforms in a generation, and those became law in 2018. And he's also spoken publicly about how morning runs, prayer, meditation, all of those things help keep him centered as a politician. So, Senator, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Let's see, it is the senator here. We'll just wait for his photo and, okay. His video is not on yet. So if the senator is here, he can turn his video on. If not, we will move to the next guest to get back to the senator. Just give us 1 second. Okay, he must have gotten off. I think we should move on to Pooja. We will come back to Senator Booker, who I very much want to hear from, but he is a senator, so he's kind of busy. Dr. Pooja Lakshmin is a psychiatrist and a best-selling author. She also serves as a clinical assistant professor of psychiatry at George Washington University School of Medicine. And her best-selling book, Real Self-Care, Crystals, Cleanses, and Bubble Baths Not Included, was recently named as an NPR Best Book of 2023. Pooja, thank you so much for joining us.
It's such a pleasure to be here, Shannon. Thank you for having me.
So, Pooja, you often talk about real self-care and faux self-care. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between the two and how these terms apply to women specifically?
Sure. So I think, all of us on this call can have had the familiar experience of making time in our day to, let's say, go get a massage, right? And clearing everything out for the evening and getting to that massage appointment and then spending the entire time on the massage table in our heads, feeling guilty, worried about whether we should be home, baking cupcakes for the PTA or whether we should be, attending to our emails or working on that last minute expense report, et cetera, et cetera. By the time the massage is over, you feel even worse. And then you feel guilty because you just spent all this money on the massage. So my take on self-care is that so much of what we hear about and talk about is this commercial, commodified version of self-care, which I call faux self-care. And that is the juice cleanses, the bubble baths, um, the crystals. And those are methods, those are tools, but the real self-care is actually internal. It's the principles. It's the work you do on the inside. And the reason that the tools are not enough is because we live in a society that puts the burden of caretaking responsibility on women, in particular women of color. We live in a country that we still don't have federally mandated paid parental leave. I think the latest statistics show that more than half of Americans live in what's called a childcare desert. 2024 report showed that if you have two kids, you're paying more than 10% of your income for childcare, right? Like these are systemic issues. And when we frame it as burnout, or when we frame it as like, just they're there, take a bubble bath, we're actually exonerating these larger systems of oppression that are keeping women down.
So give us some examples. You just gave us some examples of faux self-care. What about real self-care?
Yeah, so my take and what I talk about in the book is that real self-care is about the principles. And there's four principles: boundaries, compassion, values, and power. And we're going to be talking about compassion. I know Kristen's going to be going into that, and Sharon's going to be diving into intention and values. Um, so it's like real self-care is a verb, it's an internal process. It's having those hard conversations with your partner where you say, you know what, I do a lot better when I go to yoga once a week. So can we work out a system where you're able to go for your run and I'm able to go to yoga, and we do pizza for dinner on Friday nights and let the kids just sit on the couch and watch TV so that we can do our thing, right? Like there has to be a negotiation, and there has to be a willingness for all parties, right, to support each other. And I know we'll dive more into compassion and values, but it's really like what Audre Lorde said. Self-care, real self-care is self-preservation. And especially when you're in this activist work, especially when you're somebody who's an organizer or a leader, I think you have to think of yourselves as on the front lines of the battle. And so things like boundaries, things like really digging deep to understand what's important to you, um, and giving yourself the space and the time and energy to have those self-reflective conversations. I just think it's as equally as important as anything else you can be doing. It's just as important as being out there knocking on doors. It's just as important as writing the postcards, because like what you said, Shannon, this is not a sprint. This is not a marathon. This is not a sprint, right? This is a marathon. And I know we have this very important election in front of us. I think like 40 days.
Mhm.
Um, and there's always the next election. Like the goal is that we are all still here and we all keep showing up.
And Pooja, conversely, for some people, activism is self-care. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. So there's this concept in psychology called self-efficacy, which basically means that you have the belief that even when you're in a difficult circumstance, you can still take action to make change. And if you think about that, that is a version of community engagement and
Mm,
activism. You are using your agency to try and enact what is important to you in the world. And that is actually protective. It's just that you have to know when to dial it back and when to push forward. So, really, one of the things that I say is that part of our power, part of real self care is recognizing for yourself when you need to ask for help and when you need to offer help.
mm. Pooja, when it comes to women, and you work so much with women in your practice, what obstacles do you see them facing when they attempt to practice self-care?
Yeah. So the number one thing is guilt. The number one thing is guilt and telling ourselves that we are selfish, that we're selfish for taking time for ourselves, for thinking about ourselves. And the reality is that I like to tell this story. So I met a woman a couple years ago who just told me the story that stuck with me. Her neighbor was a chef and he had just tried out this amazing recipe for a steak dinner, and he just was like, hey, like, Sally, I made this steak dinner, I'd love to bring some over to you for your family. And she literally, her mouth was salivating as she said no, because she was like, who am I to take a dinner from somebody else? I have so much around me, I have, a great job, a great family. So it's like we talk ourselves out of being able to take up space. And
Mm,
I like to think of those like when people offer you help, when people solicit you for, whatever it is, we need to say yes, because
mm.
that is a bid for connection. That neighbor wanted to be part of this community, and that was his way to say, let me be part of your community. You're not being selfish. There's actually pro-social benefits to saying yes to receiving help and to offering help.
Pooja, thank you so much for your advice and your work and defining the difference between faux self-care and real self-care. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so excited to hear Dr. Senator Booker.
Yes, I think he's here now. So, Senator Booker, if you are here, we would love to hear from you. Senator,
Hello there. Hello. I hope you can hear me.
we can, and
Uh,
we are so eager to hear from you about self-care and your self-care practices.
I don't think I'm a great model of self-care. That's why I was happy the list of Pooja talks so much. And I think it's been an ongoing struggle. I have the saying that if America hasn't broken your heart, you don't love her enough. I think their very act of love makes you vulnerable and open to the pains and the hurts of the world. To be somebody that leads with love, that is empathetic, it makes you much more vulnerable to the challenges, and I think it puts more of a urgency to having some kind of self care. And the first thing that you do is you find community. And for me, I've been very blessed to have a circles of people who we're all in the struggle together, who really helped me. Tonight I'm driving all the way back to New Jersey to do a funeral for tomorrow, then driving back to preside over the Senate. And I'm going to one of the women who I always say raised me. I was a kid that grew up in a very sort of affluent town, and then after law school moved into a very low income neighborhood where we don't discuss mistake wealth with worth.
Mm,
And I met these heroic women who had seen the most wretchedness of our world. Miss Jones, who was the main person. This was the funeral tomorrow is for Miss Wright, who was Miss Jones's sort of chief lieutenant. Her son was murdered in the projects that I would eventually move into, and I remember just being how stunned that she never left.
mm,
With this horrific gun violence in the lobby of the building I would move into, where she literally was pulled down to see her own son dying of these wounds, that she kept going. And I asked her once why she didn't move. She and I made enough money to move to a safer community, or a community that had running water and regular running water and regular heat. And I never forget, she said, "Why do I still live in these buildings, Corey?" And I go, "Yes, Miss Jones." She goes, "Why am I still in apartment 5A?" And I go, "Yes, Miss Jones, why?" And she goes, "Why am I still the tenant president since these buildings were built in 1969?" And I'm thinking to myself, that's electoral longevity there. I said, yes, Miss Jones. And she goes, because I'm in charge of Homeland Security. And I just saw that she had this view of the world where she really took responsibility, that even in the most wretched of times and the most awful imaginable things visited upon her, she fought every day to create this really beloved community. I've lived in a lot of places in my life, but the sense of connection and community and common purpose and people looking out for me, the best I've ever felt like that, besides the home I grew up in, was my years living in high-rise public housing projects in the care of Miss Jones.
Mm.
And if I could tell folks the truth tonight, in my 25 years in Newark, it's a city that still, despite that community, broke me in ways I never knew I could be broken. And I felt lost and hurt and anger like I never thought I could feel living in a community that the country seemed like just didn't care about. And I'll never forget in 2004, 2 years before I would become mayor of the city, just walking in my neighborhood, gunshots rang out, and I ran towards the shooting with an off-duty cop who was with me, and there was a teenager with bullet holes in his chest, and we lay him on the grass and tried to save his life. And all the glorification of violence on TV, but a person shot like that, it's one of the most gruesome things. Gasping for breath, blood everywhere. I remember reaching my hands in his mouth when he stopped breathing and foamy blood started coming. I know nothing about medicine, just hoping if I cleared the blood and the foam from his mouth that he would breathe. Eventually the paramedics came and shoved me out of the way and ripped open his shirt. But I knew, I had felt him, literally the life go away from him. The police director at the time, who worked for the mayor that I would eventually challenge, I look. I don't remember. I can't even tell you how I came in the. But perhaps one of the next things I remember was just standing in the bathroom, trying to scrub another boy's blood off of me, and shaking, my hands shaking, and I felt this anger. I felt so much rage at our country that we swear this oath to liberty and justice for all, but Black boys were dying with unbelievable regularity in my community. It was the first time in my life I just was done. I was done with this country. I was done with my quest to make a difference. I remember getting into the shower and turning the water on so hot, hoping that the pain on the outside would dull the pain on the inside. And then I woke up the next morning and just wanted to get away and get out. And I went down in the stairs of my project, 16 flights down, and came out into the lobby. And in the back of my mind, I remembered that this was the lobby where Miss Jones's son was murdered. And when I got into the courtyard, almost if the universe conspired, the only other person in that courtyard early that morning, across the courtyard from me with her back turned to me, was Miss Virginia Jones. And I stood there, and almost as if she heard me screaming under 100 feet of water, she turns around and looks at me and does the only thing I need at that moment, which is just to open her arms. And I'll never forget running across that courtyard, and this elderly Black woman, the mother of this community, just throws her arms around me and holds me. I'm much bigger than her, but I felt like a little boy. And I broke for the first time since the death of Wazin. I broke and I wept to the point where I couldn't breathe. I was weeping. And I'll never forget this woman rubbing my back and saying over and over again two words that have become a mantra to me, that I used on the toughest days in City Hall, that I used when I was trying to help the city get off its knees, that I say to myself even now when I'm on the Senate floor feeling like I'm banging my head against implacable walls of resistance. Two words I don't think have anything to do with religion, but everything to do with how we got here. She just said over and over again as she rubbed my back, stay faithful, stay faithful, stay faithful. Mm. And so I just can't tell you how grateful I am you all have been having this conversation, because all of us here carry hurt and pain and wounds that aren't always visible, that sometimes are hidden behind our smiles. But when we find people that we have connection with and community with, and build that into coalitions that are with you in the struggle, that make you feel not alone, I think that's the stuff that restores and heals and ultimately keeps faith strong enough to get up and fight another day.
Senator, thank you so much for sharing that story. Thank you for joining us, even though you're on your way to a funeral. Thank you for being so vulnerable, but most of all, thank you for staying faithful.
I appreciate you all. This is the cause of our country. It's these elections, people try to make them political, but again, I'm going back to my home in Newark where asthma rates are off the charts, and a president's decision about air quality, it literally means how many kids will end up in hospital emergency rooms. I'm going back to a community where access to reproductive rights or access to health care were. And so to be in community tonight with others who feel the sense of urgency, you all give me strength. And I just give you all my love and my gratitude for all that you're doing in this cause, but ultimately all that you're doing to do what John Lewis called us to do in our country, is to create a more beloved community.
Thank you so much, Senator. We really appreciate you joining us. Our next speaker tonight is Emmy Award-winning actress Liza Colón-Zayas. Liza recently won an Emmy Award for her role in the critically acclaimed series The Bear, making her the very first Latina to win an Emmy for Best Supporting Actress in a Comedy. She has been on the road lately. You may have seen her with the Harris Walls campaign, encouraging voters to get out to the polls. Liza is joining us tonight. Thank you, Liza, so much. We are so excited to hear more from you about what you're doing with the campaign and also how you manage and prioritize your career and your activism and your self-care.
Hello, Shannon. Thank you for this. And thank you, Dr. Pooja and Senator Booker. My gosh. It's so healing for me to hear about the work you're doing and seeing this light at the end of the tunnel. What am I doing? It was incredible to be invited to speak in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, with Governor Tim Walz. Absolutely beautiful human being. And then I think I might be showing up in Philly this weekend to turn out Latino vote in Philadelphia. And so anyway, I'm an actor, and I hear you guys and the profound work and dedication and sacrifice that you guys offer. And I start to right away, I'm constantly, not right away, I'm constantly questioning that I'm not doing anywhere near enough, that I'm not deserving. And I just have to remind myself that if I could change a few minds, and if people recognize themselves in me, and it gets them to the polls, then I've done something great. And it's hard to keep that mindset. I will say, I could do a lot better with self-care. I could do a lot better. I do have a meditation app. And I listen to her. And I noticed that when I can't make time to listen to my app is when I need it the most. And so another thing is that I have to sometimes accept, the not the not healthy ways of turning it off. And that'll be like, yeah, I can spend hours looking at videos of kittens and 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 binging my shows because I can feel the weight of feeling like everything is really kind of, the walls are closing in. And so I gotta allow myself the space and the time to not judge how I relax. A little escapism. Um, I can't claim to be super connected to uh any practice. But one thing I did hear was one of the coaches um was talking about how, like, you don't have to go to an entire um retreat. Maybe you start with a small change of doing 1 minute a day of breathing. If we can start there and be consistent with that, it'll probably make a more profound change in your spiritual health, your mental health, than putting these epic demands of making these giant changes. And so that's what I'm trying to, focus on, is giving myself a little bit of time a day to make one tiny, tiny change. And maybe I should be dreaming big, but then I'm the type that if I the perfectionism is brutal, that voice that is constantly critiquing. And I would say, like, with this Emmy win, for example, which I never could have imagined, if I have this little bit of time right now to bring attention to Kamala Harris and her record, and if it moves anyone, then I'm going to use my platform for now to be able to do that. For as long as this attention is my 15 minutes last, that's what I can do. And so, I just want to say, give yourselves a break. Let's give ourselves a break. Let's not be so hard on ourselves. We're here. Let me take some time out and just chill. And tomorrow's another day. And I revere you all, and I am so thankful for the work that you're doing. But I think for all of us listening, any small thing, don't judge it. Take the time out to do what you need to do for yourself, and so that we can be healthy and not burnt out. And I know Kamala's gonna win. I know it.
I do
I
too.
cannot
I know,
wait
right? Yes.
to wake up on November 7th.
Liza, thank you so much. And when you started talking about breathing, I started breathing because I realized I was sitting here not breathing. So even that small thing helped me feel better. So thank you. And thank you for all you're doing and for joining us tonight. We really are grateful for it.
Thank you.
Next, it is an incredible honor for me to introduce a world-renowned meditation pioneer. She's going to lead us through a mini training on preventing election work burnout. Sharon Salzberg is a New York Times bestselling author of 13 books. She is a co-founder of the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts. She was among the first teachers to bring meditation to mainstream American culture 50 years ago, and she has inspired generations of practitioners, including myself. Sharon is also currently offering her own series on how to navigate election season with loving kindness, compassion, and joy. So Sharon, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, it's such an enormous delight to be with you all. And um, I think I just want to amplify everything that's been spoken already because it's so beautiful and so important. So I have been teaching meditation for like 50 years, as you said, long before, as my friends would say, long before it became cool. And probably my particular passion has evolved to working with caregivers, working with activists, working with leaders who, and often they're reluctant leaders, you know, the people who in some ways are on the front lines of suffering, really seeing the struggles or the suffering of someone or a community and are working to do something about it. And it's, you know, as we've heard, I really do believe it's the very caring of that group that can lead to not only their work, but to distress and overwhelm, and sometimes in doing the work. You know, I think we live in a time where we also hear a lot about empathy training, and I think it's so important because we see, you know, the coldness and the cruelty of a world that isn't governed so much by empathy. But I keep thinking about these people, like kind of my people, and I think they got plenty of empathy, you know, and it's not that that's leading to burnout or distress or to just exhaustion and not being able to continue on. It's something else. It's more about a question of some kind of balance. And I used to think the word balance was like so stupid. And I equated it in my mind with mediocrity, like who wants to be balanced, you know, or get up earlier in the morning to practice something to be more balanced. But I began to see it as kind of being in harmony with the truth of things, you know, that we need a balance of, as we'll hear, you know, more compassion for ourselves as well as compassion for others. And we need a balance of, you know, compassion and effort and the work that we do, and also realistic limits about boundaries when we need a break and so on. So even though I know self-care can seem like the most selfish thing in the world, it is actually so essential for resilience. And I've seen that what we really need are tools to address like the real toll, the genuine toll on our nervous systems, as you were describing, Shannon. You know, somebody drops something and it's like we freak out. To help us with the ups and downs, the inevitable ups and downs of any effort to make a difference. We need tools that are simple enough so we can access them in complex situations. And so I want to talk about some of those tools that I've seen work. And some of it really has to do, for some people, with remembering what they've done. And that can be, you know, like I did a 4-year program for domestic violence shelter workers, people who worked front lines in the shelters. And later on took some of that model to other groups. And one of the things we always had people do in the beginning, you could do it journaling or as a reflection, is sort of write down, what do you do for perspective? What do you do to get a break? What do you do to breathe, to remember to breathe, and so on. And then in the next column, we'd say, now write down how you feel about what you just wrote down. And I think in 4 years of doing it, every single person wrote down, listen to music, although there's always different kinds of music. People would write down all kinds of things. And I took that model to working with military caregivers like medics and chaplains. And this one man wrote down, I get out in nature. It's so restorative. It gives me the strength to go back to what I'm facing, you know, real hardships and difficulties. And I kayak and it's so enormous. And then he wrote down in the next column, I haven't done it in about 7 years. So we thought, well, hey, you know, like maybe pick it up. It's not wrong. You know, as we've been hearing, it's essential to resilience. And then we offer tools, you know, that could be available. And since we're talking about breathing, I want to go through just a couple of different breathing exercises that are possible. One is really, and again, these sound very simple, and I used to be very disdainful of that. But remember, we're reaching for these things as we hear a minute. You know, we're not talking about 7 hours sitting in some pretzel-like pose, removing yourself from your situation and the complexities of life. It's what can you do in a few moments in very complex situations. So there's a form of breathing where there are many ways of doing it, but basically, if your out breath is longer than your in breath, they say that the parasympathetic nervous system will take over for the sympathetic nervous system and you'll start to chill. Let's just do 3 breaths like that. Now, again, I used to be a little contemptuous of things like that. And yet they're actually very effective. I've taught that, for example, to survivors of gun violence in a retreat we did here. And amongst them was a teacher who was from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas School in Parkland, Florida. And the retreat ended on Sunday. She went back to work on Monday and they had a drill. So of course that was re-traumatizing and really terrible. And she was bent over in the closet having a panic attack. And she remembered this tool. And she started breathing and it could ease her situation enough so that she'd get out of the closet and go on. So that would be one example. Another example, as you said, Shannon, we forget to breathe in ordinary situations when we get lost in some kind of momentum. And just recognizing the breath is always with us, it's very portable. And just the normal natural breath, like let's just do that 3 times. Rest your attention on wherever you feel the breath. Nostrils, chest or abdomen. And the word is rest. And then just utilize that, build it into your day, those moments before you make a really nerve-wracking phone call, before you're going into a meeting. Just remember, take a breath. Take 3 breaths. And when you freeze, because things are so tense, remind yourself, just take a breath. Then you can respond to the situation and not just react. And there are just 2 reflections I want to briefly go through. One is before major conversation, before a major effort or endeavor, just kind of look back and remind yourself, what's my intention? What do I really want to see happen most? Do I want to be seen as right? Or do I want a resolution? Do I want to look better than anybody else in that kind of weird perfectionism we can suffer from? Or do I want to actually connect? Just connect. And remember that our intention will be like our North Star when we can recall it in any situation. It's what we care about more than anything. And can come back to do that. And then just as another reflection, which I think is incredibly important, is that we're not alone. It is inevitable, I think, in that kind of work, in this kind of work, we go through times of tremendous, overwhelming anger or grief or uncertainty or despair. And rather than in any way judging what we feel or being ashamed of it or feel we shouldn't have it, we can understand all of these feelings almost like deserve the dignity of their own space, and we're not alone. When we go into that meeting or that phone call or that encounter or that moment of uncertainty, we don't know, how things are going to resolve. We are bringing with us all those beings from the past who have inspired us or mentored us or shown us something is possible. And all of us, who are in some way working together. And the more we understand that, and the more we consciously bring that kind of reflection into our work, I think the more resilience and the more we have the energy to actually go on in a better way.
Sharon, thank you so much. I love the reminder to think about our intention as activists and the fact that that intention is most often to connect with other people, and it just puts you in a different mind frame. So, Sharon, thank you so much for joining us tonight and giving us your expertise. We really appreciate it. I have been honored for the last decade to watch Erica Ford work as an activist. She is widely known as the Peace Doctor. She is an internationally recognized leader. She's an innovator in the field of community healing and violence prevention. And she has over 3 decades of experience in this kind of activism, and she has helped transform some of the most vulnerable communities in America. Tonight, Erica will share her insights on self-care with us as one of the most impactful social peace agents of our time. Erica, great to see you tonight.
Peace. Great to be seen. It's great to see everybody as well.
You have worked tirelessly, as I said, for 30 years, and you have learned a lot. I would love to start with, what have you seen lead to a lack of self-care, or what we call burnout, in activists that you work with?
I don't even have to go to activists that I work with. I could go to myself. I almost died last year, and I almost died because, contrary to what Sharon just said we should do, breathe and rest, I didn't do it. And a lot of us feel that we have to save the world. We have to win this campaign. It's my knocking on this door that's going to cause her to win, and I gotta go do it. Even though I'm half dead, can't breathe, didn't eat, I gotta do it. And because the world is gonna collapse if I don't. And I did that for 30 years. And when she talked about the nervous system, my nervous system just crashed. It said no more. Like, I had several signs where I would just pass out, can't do no more, but that wasn't enough. That wasn't enough. I had to I lost 62 pounds in a month. And, on top of it, when we're running around doing all of this, we're eating at the place that's closest to us. And it's processed food, it's fried food, it's non-healthy food. And so putting all of those different things into our body, out of our body, the stress on our body, the trauma. Corey talked about going to those funerals. I've been to more funerals than one could ever talk about. I have been at more school shootings and didn't even call them school shootings. Mass shootings, didn't even call it, was just a shooting. It just happened, right? And so we make these things normal, right? And those things, beyond your knowledge, takes a toll on your nervous system, and you get depleted and you can't exist anymore. And so, you have to breathe. You have to stop. You cannot save the world. You cannot save the world. The world's success is not your responsibility. And take it from me, someone who has dedicated. I started when I was 22 years old. I'm going to be turning 60 next year in April, and I haven't stopped, And so paying attention, like, I've seen a lot of people, some didn't wake up. Some didn't wake up because they just, didn't take care of themselves, and they had a heart attack. They had a stress attack. They had a do too much work attack, And so we take it lightly. We take lightly what the doctor says to us. We take lightly that, I got a pain in my head, I got a pain here or pain there. It's nothing. I can keep going. No, those are signs for you to sit down.
Erica, what was it? What was the turning point for you? How did you realize that you needed to change, and what did you do?
I went to Bali for 2 months.
Well, that is nice.
I went to Bali for 2 months, and I did nothing. Before that, I did like a physical detox with Queen Afua, sister from my organization, Kepler Cares. I literally changed my diet, radical rupture. I stopped eating processed food. I stopped eating meat. I eat meat now because I had to go back to eating meat because I was 99 pounds and I'm 5'11". So everybody thought I was dying because of the way I looked. And so I started to eat to live. You know, we hear it a lot, but it's really something that we have to pay attention to, because if not, it'll take you out, because you're running around, and we're trying to win this. As someone just said, she's going to win, right? And so as we're doing the work for the campaign, people telling you no, people telling you stuff about somebody, stay focused on what you're trying to do, and that's win. You don't look back. I used to run track. When you're running over those hurdles, you can't look back at the person behind you, right? You just got to look ahead at what your target is, what your victory mission is, and that's what we have to do for this race. We have to stay focused on victory. Don't look to the left. Don't look to the right. Especially don't look behind. Right? And stay focused on, if you got to knock doors, knock doors. If you got to make calls, make calls. But stay focused on your victory, and don't get sidetracked by the noise, because the noise brings stress and brings trauma. It brings a mindset of defeat and comparison and jealousy and envy and all of those things. Believe it or not, it takes a toll on your nervous system, you know, that you can't measure it because you don't see it.
Erica, thank you so much for taking time out of I know you're at a conference with 25,000 women tonight in Dallas. People should follow you. You do amazing work. And thank you for giving us a pep talk and helping us stay focused tonight. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for having me. Peace.
Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Kristen Neff. She is an associate professor of educational psychology at the University of Texas at Austin, and she's a pioneer in the field of self-compassion research. Kristen, in fact, conducted some of the first empirical studies on self-compassion over 20 years ago, and along with her colleague, Chris Gerner, she developed this empirically supported mindful self-compassion program, and they even recently published a book. It's called Mindful Self-Compassion for Burnout: Tools to Help You Heal and Recharge When You're Wrung Out by Stress. Perfect for tonight's conversation. Kristen is going to guide us now through a mini self-compassion practice. Kristen?
Yeah, thank you, Shannon, and thank you so much for having me on this call. I'm so glad that everyone's coming together to think about this really important issue of, given all the stress every one of us is going through, how do we sustain ourselves? And I really believe that self-compassion is a key part of that. So just to say, what is self-compassion? What do I mean by that? Well, if you break down the word in Latin, passion means to suffer, come is with. So basically, how do we show up for ourselves when we're struggling, right? So self-compassion, are we with ourselves like a good supportive friend? Are we encouraging? Are we understanding? Are we supportive? Or do we show up for ourselves like an enemy? Do we cut ourselves down? Do we shame ourselves? Do we constantly judge ourselves? And my research very clearly shows that when we show up for ourselves in those difficult moments with kindness, warmth, and support, it makes a huge difference in our mental health. So there are actually three components to self-compassion. The first is kindness, which I mentioned, but there's also two other elements that it's important to be aware of. One is actually mindfulness. So mindfulness is the ability to recognize that you're struggling. And you may think that's obvious, but actually it's not. You know, when you're trying to save the world, or you're working so hard, or you're trying to fix problems, sometimes we just don't stop to pause and say, wow, I'm having a really hard time right now. How can I meet my needs, or how can I help myself? So we need some mindfulness. And also really important, what differentiates self-compassion from self-pity is a sense of common humanity. So self-pity is poor me, you know, I'm working so hard. Compassion is about, okay, the human experience is difficult and the human experience is imperfect. Everyone makes mistakes, everyone struggles. So when we give ourselves compassion, we're automatically framing what we're going through in light of the shared human experience. We remember that we aren't alone. And Sharon had mentioned that, you know, oftentimes people think that self-care or self-compassion is selfish. The research shows it's just the opposite. For one, we have a lot of empirical evidence that people, whether they're caregivers or social activists, people who give themselves compassion are less likely to burn out. And it makes sense, right? Compassion needs to flow inward as well as outward, if our compassion just goes outward and we don't resource ourselves, we're going to become drained and depleted and burned out. But there's something else I want to draw your attention to that I think is something important to think about. The way the human brain evolved is that we influence each other's emotions. We're influenced by the stress and suffering of those we interact with, but they are also influenced by us. We have specialized mirror neurons called, specialized neurons, whose whole function it is to feel the emotions of others. So what you cultivate inside is what you carry to those you interact with. So in other words, when you give yourself compassion, when you resource yourself with, kindness and warmth and a feeling of connectedness, then when you go knock on that door to that voter, or you deal with the people you're working with, you're actually bringing your mindset, you're sharing it with them. On the other hand, if you're burned out, if you're stressed and you're exhausted, that's what you're bringing to other people in your life. So it's kind of a myth to think that you could even separate self-compassion or self-care from compassion and care for others, because we do influence each other. So I'm going to teach a short little practice where we can give ourselves compassion, and you'll get a little sense of what I'm talking about. And if you want, you can close your eyes while you do this practice or just look down, but I invite you to turn inward. Okay, so I'd like you to think about some of the stress you're experiencing right now. Stress concerning the election, stakes are so high. Maybe the stress that you're experiencing trying to do your volunteer work, combined with maybe your family responsibilities, other work you're involved in. Just kind of get in touch with the stress of this. So we're going to bring in the 3 elements of self-compassion to help us hold this stress. So the first is mindfulness. Simply recognize, maybe saying to yourself, actually really feeling this is hard, right? Just acknowledging it, just seeing it. This is hard to feel this. But then remembering common humanity, you aren't alone, right? There are millions of other people going through something similar. Just the women on this call are going through something very similar. But the human experience is sometimes stressful. There's nothing wrong with you for feeling this way. This is actually what makes you human. You aren't superhuman. You're only human. So just kind of acknowledging your humanity. And then see if you can bring in some kindness to yourself. One way to do that might be through a kind touch, perhaps putting your hands on your heart center or on your face, and giving yourself a warm, supportive touch. And saying some words of kindness and support to yourself. Something like, I'm here for you. I'm so sorry this is such a difficult time right now, but, how can I help you? It's going to be okay. You're worthy of care. You're worthy of support. What do you need? And see if you can let yourself just kind of take that in, this idea that your needs are important too. Okay. And so that's the self-compassion break. It's very simple. You just remember it's like 1 part mindfulness, acknowledge that it's hard. 1 part common humanity, remember you aren't alone. Do a little touch to support you. It actually activates the parasympathetic nervous system. And then some words of kindness. Research shows, believe it or not, doing 30 seconds of this a day. If maybe you're really busy, but you have 30 seconds. Doing this for 30 seconds a day can dramatically increase your mental health and increase your self-compassion. So yeah, I hope that helps. And I really just appreciate so much all the work everyone here on this call is doing to fight the good fight.
Kristen, thank you so much. I'm pretty sure that's the most relaxed I have felt in the last 50 days, just in that 1 minute, and I'm going to start doing that more. I'm a mom who always tells my kids, talk to yourself the way you would talk to a friend. And I think, that is the energy of self-compassion. So thank you so much, Kristen, for coming tonight and for sharing that with us. This has just been a dream for me to be able to MC this gathering of brilliant and thoughtful guests, honestly. I hope that if you came into this Zoom tonight thinking that you didn't have time to focus on your needs, or that you didn't deserve to focus on your needs, you didn't have an extra moment to spare, I hope you're leaving with some concrete ways that you can carve out space and really focus on your own mental and physical well-being. And I want to get to the action takeaways for this week, but first, I just want to celebrate some work that has already happened because of these Zooms that we've been getting together for every week since Kamala Harris became the presumptive nominee. So I want to share a testimonial with you from one of the action teams that gathered after this call. Right after Kamala Harris announced her presidency, a lot of you answered the call to form an All In for Harris action team. And so there are 600 of you across the country, and you can still fill out a form if you want. The info is in the link tree and in the chat. But I just want to tell you a quick story. There's a woman who emailed us to that link, and she said that she was a Chicago-based action team that came out of our calls. And she sent us an email that started with, "We want to do something." And she talks about how she and her friend, she reached out to a friend who worked at a nonprofit. She wanted to see if she needed help. She got her first yes. Then she reached out to another friend and asked her if she needed help in her getting out the vote. She said yes. Then the three of those friends got together and formed their own action team. They planned a presidential debate watch party. They wrote postcards, and they held a fundraiser, all in one. They gave out raffle prizes. They wrote hundreds of postcards. They had 40 people there, and it was so special. And not just because of the event itself, but because they felt they fostered a sense of community. And now they are planning a yoga fundraiser. So please consider starting one of those action teams, because not only will it help elect Harrison Waltz, but it will also help you find your people. And you can start your own action team. Another way to do that is to email us at womenwednesdays@invisible.org. And we really want you to share your testimonials. So if that story resonated with you and you have your own story to tell, again, womenwednesdays@indivisible.org. And then we also gave you a phone number that you could leave a voicemail and share about your work. And we are going to actually share one of those with you tonight. This woman was so excited about her actions that she wanted to share them, not just with all of you, but also she hopes the vice president. You'll understand that in a second. Let's hear from Kathy in New York. See if you can also listen for what she's doing for self-care.
Vice President Harris and Governor Waltz. This is Kathy Wasser. I live in Rockland County, New York, and I'm very, very happy and pleased to have been part of the Neighbor to Neighbor program with Indivisible. I've already completed 30, and I'm looking forward to doing another 10 when I get back in town after a brief family wedding / a vacation. It's so important that you win this year. I want you to protect our rights to vote. I want you to protect women's rights to reproductive freedom, and I want you to secure our own freedom and life here in America. So thank you very much for running for the office of President and Vice President. Good day.
That is amazing, Kathy. So inspiring. And if you want to have your work celebrated, please leave us a voicemail this week. Just call and say, "Hey, Women Wednesdays, I wanted to tell you about X." And keep it under 60 seconds and tell us about the action you're taking. We'll share it on a future call. So finally, your action takeaways for this week. Check in with yourself and assess what balance of action and care is right for you. Then decide on the action you want to take, what works for you and your self-care plan. Maybe it's an hour of door knocking or phone banking, voter registration or letter writing or anything else, and schedule it into your week along with self-care. And remember to celebrate your work. That's part of self-care too, by sending us your voicemails and emails. And then finally, join us again next week. We are going to be back to help you navigate all the polling data you're reading about, and also to discuss the importance of women in deciding this election. You will hear from actress Lucy Liu, Maryland U.S. Senate candidate Angela Alsobrooks, political strategist Maya Rupert, Nevada Congresswoman Susie Lee, comedian Michelle Bateau, and Gen Z activist Olivia Juliana. Thank you all so much for joining, and we'll see you next week.